So today we are going to start with electric potential, and so this topic is related to electrostatics, but it deals with the concept that you might have built in the electrostatic chapter and would make take it deeper into other kinds of applications and fields. So before starting with electric potential, I would like to talk about forces. Okay, so do you know what are the different kinds of forces and what are the two major categories of forces? Yeah, I mean that is one of the categories. But if you talk about forces in two broad categories, technically speaking, contact and non-contact forces, I totally agree. But that is one of the smaller categorizations of forces, and I would say it is like what you study in lower classes. But when you go to but when you go to actual physics terms, and when we talk about forces, the forces can be classified into two broad categories. They are either conservative and or they might be non-conservative. Does these terms sound familiar? Okay. So the conservative forces and the non-conservative forces are, they take up all the forces in the nature. So no matter whatever force you're talking about, be it gravity, be it electrostatic force, be it friction or air resistance, or any other, whether you talk about atomic levels, the atomic forces, all these forces boil down to these two categories. They could either be conservative or they could be non-conservative. Okay. Now, and whatever we are going to talk about today deals largely with conservative forces. So it makes a lot of sense that we understand first what these forces are. And once we understand these, we will highlight what this term is, potential, because this potential term comes from conservative forces. Okay. So without understanding these forces, we cannot understand potential and not electric potential also. Okay. So first we'll begin with what is conservative force. So do you remember any example of a conservative force? Okay. So the most familiar example I can give you is gravity. The gravity is a conservative force. Okay. Now, what do we mean when we say a force is conservative? Okay. The definition of conservative or non-conservative force is based upon another concept in physics, which is called work. Okay. As you might remember from your class 9th or 11th, a work, what is work? A work is so force does work, right? So force is the capacity to do some work. When you apply force on an object or a mass, some work gets done. Given that the mass is moving to some distance. So for example, if I have a block of mass m and I'm applying a force of magnitude F Newton, and the mass gets displaced to a distance of d, as you might recall, these are 11th class concepts. So when a force is applied on a mass m and the force gets displaced to a distance d, the work which is done in doing so is given by F into d joules, right? Which is nothing but Newton meter, right? So this is your work. Okay. Now, when we talk about conservative force, the definition is built on top of the work done by that force. Okay. So let's say if this force that I'm applying on this mass was a conservative force, okay, then what will happen is no matter which direction do I move this object, it will only the work will only depend upon the initial position and the final position of the object. Okay. So now we are looking at it in the side view. Let's say we are talking about we're looking at it in the top view. Okay. And I'm just representing this by points. So let's say this was my initial point and this was my final point. Okay. And I was starting here. Now, if I move this object along this straight line by distance d, or let's say I move along this zigzag line or along this line, this and the force applied is constant, which is F magnitude. The work done would always be F into d. Okay. So if the force is conservative, the work done does not depends upon the path followed. It only depends upon the distance between the initial position and the final position. Okay. The best example when I say why gravity is a conservative force, what you can think about is, let's say we have a this is our ground and we have a ball of mass m. Okay. And gravity is always applying a force downwards, right? Which will be equal to m into g, mass m being the mass and g being the gravitational acceleration. So gravity is always applying a force on the mass, on all the masses above it. So, and we have the let's say we are at a distance d from the ground. So when the mass comes down, but here the work which would be done by gravity would be equal to mgd, right? Now if we take it back up, so step one was we brought it down, step two we take it up. Now when we are taking it up, you see the object is moving in this direction, right? But the force is being applied downwards, right? So the displacement is negative as compared to the force because they are exactly in the opposite direction. Force is downwards, but the displacement is upwards, right? So when we take it upward, the work done would be minus mgd, right? So when it comes down, the gravity does a negative positive work on this, and that means that that much work done goes into the energy, and it becomes at a very fast pace, right? When it reaches the ground, so that work got converted into the energy of this work. Okay, this ball. When we took it upwards, the energy started reducing again because negative work was done, and then when it reaches this point again, it will become a velocity zero, right? It will stop here, and then it will start again coming down. So now you see in step three again came down. So in this entire scenario where the mass started at the top, came to the ground, went up, and then again came down, if you calculate the work done, it would still be mgd, right? Because when it came down, it was positive mgd. When it went up, it was minus mgd. And when it again came down, it was plus mgd, right? So you see, it followed this path, right? No, not this one. I'm sorry. So it started from the top, but it came down. So it followed this path, right? And still the work done was same as straight down. Do you get it? So the ball came down, went up, and then came back down. This path, the work done here was mgd, and then it came straight down. It was again still mgd, and it should be again same as coming down, going up, coming down, going up, and then again coming down, right? This would still be, because see, this would be plus mgd, this would be minus mgd, this would be plus mgd, this would be minus mgd, and this would be plus mgd. These all will be cancelled out to zero, and there would be only one mgd left, right? So what you get from this experiment is that no matter what the path that the ball is following, the work done is only depending upon the initial and final positions, right? And that is what a conservative force does. It does not matter what path you're following, the work done on the object would always depend on the initial and the final position. Okay. So that is what a conservative force does. Okay. Uh, I hope you have taken the notes. Can I go to the next slide? Okay. All right. So that was all about conservative forces. Now, what is non-conservative force? Exactly. Now, can you think of an example? Okay, let's see. For example, we have, let's say this is Earth, and the spacecrafts which are there, when they go up, that's not a problem. When they're coming, they have to uh, face a huge layer of atmosphere around the Earth, right? and this is the biggest challenge when they enter the Earth atmosphere. So there has been a lot of mishaps in the past. The most notable being when Kalpana Chawla's aircraft just burned and she died. Right? It was while re-entering the Earth atmosphere. Okay. What happens is if they come, if the spacecraft comes head-on to the atmosphere, the air around here would put so much of resistance that it will generate a lot of heat, right? It will generate a lot of heat on the spacecraft, and it would eventually might crash. Okay. So what aircrafts do is rather than coming head on, they go like this in spherical paths, and they slowly they'll go in this kind of a spiral path. And so see, they are not going head on with the atmosphere, right? And they will eventually finally come down to the earth. You getting my point? So they never go head on. They go in the spiral path so that they have to. So the earth atmosphere would not give them as much resistance as it would be giving when they come head on, right? This is one of the example of non-conservative force. Now you see the the path when we say that a conservative force depend only upon the initial and final position, whereas non-conservative forces they depend upon the path followed. Okay, so the force when you're coming in this direction is lesser than when the force when you come in this direction. Okay, because they when you come head on you face a lot more resistance as compared to when you're grazing around the atmosphere. Okay, so air resistance is one of the very good examples of non-conservative force. Any kind of resistance. The other resistance could be friction is another form of resistance, right? So this you might have felt. So for example, when the road is very smooth, okay, and when you're driving on it, it's riding a bicycle, it's easier for you. Whereas when the road is very undulating and you're riding bicycle on it, it's very difficult, right? Also, so let's say this is your initial point and that is your final point. Okay, now if you go straight it's easier, but if you go like this or if you go like this, you would have to put more force on on your bike, right, to travel the longer distance, isn't it? So this force depends upon your path that you're following. So usually what happens is people would try to take a path with uh, smallest distance between the initial and final position to avoid the resistance from the ground. Okay, so non-conservative forces depend upon the path that you follow. Okay, and let's say if you take a mass and you put on a rough ground, and if you move it once from here to here, let's say you move across 5 meters. Okay, and let's say the box is quite heavy, let's say around 20 kgs. If you touch the ground you will see that it is a bit warmer as compared to initially. And then if you move it to and fro multiple times, and then when you touch the ground you will see that it's even more hotter. Can you relate to it? So what this friction is doing is all the work that you're doing on the block, no, it's getting dissipated into thermal energy, right? It's wasting all that work that you're doing. If the block, if there was no friction on the ground, whatever work you might have done, this block might have gained a kinetic energy and will keep on moving till infinity, assuming that there is no friction, right? So if the force is conservative, that means this is the only force which is conservative force, and there's no other force being applied here by friction. So that force gets stored, it does not get wasted. Okay, whereas conservative force are always we try to avoid the non-conservative forces because they dissipate the energy which is gained on the object by doing some useful work into these the energies which is not required, like thermal energy and other noise and other kind of energies. Okay, so I hope the idea is clear. So what is conservative forces and what are non-conservative forces? uh, so the conservative forces depend only on the initial and final position, whereas the non-conservative forces depends upon the path that we are following. Okay. Okay. Now let's see what does electric potential means. Do you want me to give you another example of conservative or non-conservative force, or we are okay? Okay. So if you're taking notes, you can write this. conservative forces conserve mechanical energy. Okay. Whereas non-conservative forces do not. Okay. Now, I have introduced a new term here, mechanical energy. Do you remember what is mechanical energy? A mechanical energy is nothing but your kinetic energy and potential energy. Yeah. So the inclusion of both kinetic and potential energy is nothing but your mechanical energy. So when we are in a force, when a conservative force is applied, your mechanical energy would always be conserved. And that makes sense. If you are having a frictionless floor and you are putting a mass on it and you're applying a force on it, okay, and you move it till a distance here, till d, okay. So any whatever force you applied and then you stop here, the block will keep on moving, right, till infinity, because it might have gained some kinetic energy. Similarly, when in the ball and ground example, when we had a ball held at a height h and it started coming down, see, when it was as a height h, it had a potential energy called as mgh, and when it started coming down, that potential energy started converting into kinetic energy, right? And it will have exactly equal kinetic energy when it is just hitting the ground. And the potential energy would be zero. So the entire potential energy got converted into kinetic energy, right? That was only possible because gravity was a conservative force. And whereas not in non-conservative forces, that never happens. Okay. So now if let's say air comes around in the picture, which is usually the case in all the practical scenarios, when there is air and the ball is coming from height h and it is reaching the ground, its kinetic energy would not be equal to mgh. Rather, it would be less than that. I am just taking a symbol delta to denote that there was some loss due to friction, air resistance. Okay. All right. Great. So I think we are clear with conservative and non-conservative forces. What you can note down again here is that your force of gravity, when a gravity applies force on an object, it will give rise to potential energy, and isn't it? Gravitational potential. Similarly, when another example of conservative forces like spring. So when you have an object which is connected to a spring and you press some distance x, it will have the potential, right, to do some work when you press it up. So like here we took the ball of mass m to height h, it has the potential to do something. It can come down on its own. When you press a spring with a mass m, it has a potential to push across. So these conservative forces give rise to potential energies. So this is called as potential energy of spring. Whereas if you have a force of friction, when a friction does some work, it does not give rise to any potential energy. So why I went to the concept of conservative and non-conservative forces is we had a term called as electric potential, and this electric potential, or any potential for that matter, is only concerned with the conservative forces. Okay, only conservative forces can give rise to a potential, and no other forces. Okay, so hope you understood and you got the significance of conservative forces. And when we say we are talking about electric potential, you can infer that electrostatic energy would also be which kind of force? Or electrostatic force would be what it would be? Would it be conservative or would it be non-conservative? You can take a guess. Exactly. And that's why we're talking about electric potential, right? If it was not conservative, there would be no concept of potentials. Okay. So when there is a conservative force field, then only there would be a concept of potential related to that conservative force field. Okay. Now we have done a background understanding, and this is what you need from class 11 when you start this chapter. And I understand maybe this is usually missed, so people don't have the background understanding. So I thought it's important to cover it before starting with electric potential. All right. So now we can begin properly with electric potential. Okay. So to start off, I'll give you what is the definition of it, and this is going to be your textbook definition. So you can take a note of it. The electric potential or electrostatic potential energy. So we'll define this first, and then we'll go to what is potential. Okay. You know already that what an electrostatic force is. When a charge is placed, right? A charge q, let's say charge small q is placed, it will have an electric field around it, right? If it is a positive charge, it would be going away from the charge. And when a small charge dq is placed, you if you don't like the term why I'm writing dq, you can just ignore it and maybe I can change it to something else. Fine, right? Yeah, just think of this as a small charge. When a small charge dq is placed in the field around another charge q, this small charge will uh, experience a force in the direction of the field. Okay, that force is called as electrostatic force, and it is proportional to the product of the two charges q dq, and it is inversely proportional to the distance between them, when just assuming that distance between these two charges is r. So it is inversely proportional to the distance between two charges, and it is directly proportional to the product of their magnitude of charges. And then Coulomb said that this force would be equal to the kq dq upon r square, right? Or the usual thing is kq and q2 upon r square. And this k is called as Coulomb's constant, because when you convert from proportionality to equality, you have to use a constant of proportionality. Okay. So this force is called as electrostatic force, and this force is also conservative. It's quite like gravity, because you can look at the equation and it looks quite similar to gmm upon r square, isn't it? Which is the gravity force. The only difference would be that this is quite larger in magnitude as compared to gravity. Gravity is largely a weaker force as compared to electrostatic force. Well, that's a very good observation. Exactly. And the reason why gravitational is only attraction is because mass has no polarity. There is no positive mass and negative masses, whereas charges have polarity, right? So that is the main reason for the directional nature of electrostatic forces. Okay, that's a good observation. One more thing to note here is that, okay, if these two charges are placed together, wouldn't they be experiencing gravitational force? Yeah, so nature of charge would determine the nature of electrostatic force, right? Is it attraction or repulsion? What I was trying to ask here is, let's say I place two charges, q and small q, at a distance r. So let's say this is a small question that comes up. What are the different forces that they might be experiencing? So one definite answer would be electrostatic force, right? Now my second question is, would they be experiencing gravitational forces? I'm saying that these are kept in vacuum. Okay, these are in vacuum and space, you can say. Exactly. Exactly. Yeah. Gravity is a universal force, and no matter if it is a charge or a very small charge, it will still have at least the mass of an electron, right? Or a mass of a proton. And those masses, even though smaller, are still masses, and hence there would still be a force of gravity, although it would be very minimal in magnitude, very small as compared to electrostatic force. And gravitational force would always be attractive in nature, but there would be a electrostatic force which would be repulsive, considering the fact that these two charges are of same polarity. And this force of, and if I compare the magnitude of these two, the electrostatic force would be very large as compared to gravitational force, and hence the overall effect of these two forces is that the charges repel each other, okay, and not attract. But yeah, there are scenarios, and you can find some scenarios, and maybe I will give you this kind of a problem maybe tomorrow, where you would find that the charges are so small that gravitational force overrules the uh, electrostatic force. That can also happen, okay. Let's say I have a very huge masses. I have very huge masses, but the charges on them are very small, okay. In that case, the gravitational force will win over the electrostatic force, okay. You get the point, right? Okay. So gravitational force is always there. Even though it is charges, they will have gravitational. I wanted to just clear that misnomer. Sometimes people get confused. Okay. So our main concern was what is electrostatic potential energy, and we have stated the fact that electrostatic force is a conservative force, as was the gravitational force, as was the spring force, and hence, since electrostatic force is a conservative force, it has a potential associated to it. And when, and how does this potential come? When a work is done uh, by this electrostatic force. So whenever a force does some work, it will convert that work into the potential energy, right? If the force is conservative. So since electrostatic force is a conservative force, a work done by this electrostatic force will give rise to a potential, and or a potential energy, and that energy is called as electrostatic potential energy. Do you get my point? Okay. So let's write that down, okay? So electrostatic potential energy, uh, in a conservative force, you can write field. So field, we'll talk about field in a bit. So in a conservative force field, it is the work done in assembling a system of particles. What am I talking about? Am I talking about electrostatic potential energy? No, I'm talking about potential energy in general. What is potential energy? So when we have a conservative force field, something like gravitational force or an electrostatic force or a spring force, the potential energy is nothing but the work done in assembling a system of particles. So in case of gravity and the ball of mass m, the gravitational potential energy would be the work that I had to do to take this ball to height h. Whatever work I did on this ball got converted into its potential energy, which was mgh, right? In the spring mass system, the potential energy of the spring and the mass is the work that I had to do to compress this mass and the spring in the present configuration, where I moved it to a distance x and compresses. Or the other scenario could be that I pulled it. So no matter whether I push it or pull it, it's the equal work done, and that force is given by kx, and the work would be done, right? So uh, so even here I had to do some work in bringing it to this configuration. Either I compressed the spring or I expanded the spring, right? Similarly, in case of electrostatic forces, if I had a charge q already there, it would have an electric field around it, and this field would always exert a force on any charge that comes near it, And when I start bringing a small charge q, which was initially at infinity, so theoretically the field would not reach there and it was happy and it was not experiencing any force. But as soon as I started moving it into the field, I should rather use a different color. Yeah. So when I started moving it into the field and towards the charge, and let's say I brought it here where it is now at a distance r, right? It would have experienced forces all the way through. So I had to do some work to bring it near it, right? And whatever work I did into on this charge would get converted into its potential energy, and it will have the potential to do some work when I release that force. And it will, as you might you can imagine, as soon as you stop stopping it here, it will run away to infinity again, right? Similarly, when you release the mass here, it will come back to the ground again, right? When you release this mass here in the spring, it will either go away if it was pushed, or it will come back if the spring was expanded, right? So whatever work we did got converted into the potential energy, since all these force fields were conservative force fields. Okay. So this is the general definition of a potential energy. Okay. I hope you had written it. Now let's, okay. So now let's talk about electrostatic potential energy. And this is where you might get questions. So what is electrostatic potential energy? Drawing on the conclusions that we had just uh, discussed, what it would be, it is the work done not just unit charge, not just unit charge. Yeah. So it is the work done in assembling a system of charges, right? It could be not unit charge. It could not be just one charge. I could bring 5 charges together, right? I still would have to do work, and it would be significantly larger. So it is the work done in assembling a system of charges against the electric forces of the system. Okay. All right. So this is called as electrostatic potential energy. When you read some good text, I'm not sure about NCRT, but if you read some high level text, this electrostatic potential energy is also called as interaction energy. Okay. Interaction energy of system of charges. Or let's say when you're writing the JE paper, if they'll ask you calculate the interaction energy of these configuration of charges, you should not get confused. What you have to do is you just have to calculate the electrostatic potential energy. It is also called as interaction energy of system of charges. Okay. Now, how do we calculate this? Okay. So, for the calculation of electric potential energy, what happens is, see, when I say, yeah, excuse me. So when I say that when I this mass has some potential energy, right? I say that it has got some potential. So the term potential, right? When I say that you have got potential to do a lot good or a lot better. I'm saying like I'm drawing some reference between things, right? When I say a person has a potential to, let's say, win a competition, I say that he has a potential against himself where he is currently, or maybe against someone else. So there has to be some reference, right? When you draw, when you say that something has a potential. So when I say that this mass has a potential to do something, I'm saying that this mass has a potential to do work as compared to the mass which is lying on the ground, right? So there has to be some reference drawn. Similarly, when I say that this mass has a potential to do some work, I'm saying that this mass has potential to do something as the reference to the mass which is lying at rest and the spring is slack, right? Not tensed or not compressed. Similarly, when I say that this charge which is now at this position R from the charge capital Q, it has a potential to do some work as compared to the charge which is lying at infinity, right? So there, whenever we talk about potential, there has to be a reference determined to calculate it. Okay. So in case of calculation of electrostatic potential energy, I have already given you. So uh, for calculation of, I would use some acronyms, so you can ask me if you don't get it. So for calculation of electrostatic potential energy or interaction energy, we consider our reference of zero potential energy when charges are at infinite separation and the interaction energy is zero between them. What I'm trying to say here is that although I can understand maybe you might have not thought about it, but whenever we say about some potential, there has to be a reference defined, right? What does it mean when I say that this has a potential of mgh? I mean, what are we comparing against? So we need to tell, okay, as compared to this, we have a potential, higher potential, and that is the value of this. Similarly, for charges, we have to determine that. And for charges, it is the charge which is at infinite separation from each other. And in that case, the interaction energy is assumed to be zero. Okay. All right. Now, I think we got a few more minutes. Before that, I think I can leave you with some calculations. Okay. So the next calculation is quite important, and it is called as interaction energy of system of two charged particles. So until now, whatever we have discussed was all qualitative. Okay, we understood the concept of potential energy. We understood what is electrostatic potential energy. What are conservative forces? What are non-conservative forces? Why do conservative forces give rise to a potential? Right. And do you have any doubts in here? Anything? Oh, okay. So we know what an electrostatic force is, okay? Just like we knew what was gravitational forces. But we ended up calculating the gravitational potential energy, right? Until now, we have not seen how do we calculate electrostatic potential energy. We know what it is, but let's see how we can quantify it. Until now we know for sure that the electrostatic potential energy between two charges which are at infinite distance is assumed to be zero. That is our reference. Now, when we bring it to a distance r, how do we tell the electrostatic potential energy of the system? So let's start quantifying things and let's get things interesting. And whenever I say electrostatic potential energy, I might sometimes say interaction energy as well. Okay. Both are same things. So electrostatic potential energy or interaction energy. And this term is very intuitive, right? Interaction, when they interact with each other, what is the energy of the system? So interaction energy of a system of two charged particles. All right. So let's say we have a charge q1. Let's see. Yeah, I think this is better. So let's say we have a charge q1 of magnitude plus q1, and okay, and we have another charge q2 of magnitude plus q2, which was initially at infinity. Okay, so if these two charges are separated by infinite distances, definitely there won't be any electrostatic force in picture, right? Theoretically, when they are very far away. Okay, now what we do is we start bringing this charged particle slowly towards q1. Okay, now when it is at any generic distance, let's say x from q1, the force on q2 would be in what direction, assuming that both are positive charges? The force would be in this direction, right? Yeah, it would be a repelling force, and we can call this as F. And what would be the magnitude? It would be given by Coulomb's expression, just K Q1 Q2 by x square, right? At any general distance x. Okay. Now the final stage is that we bring both Q1 and Q2 at a distance r from each other, and that's where your Q2 is now. All right. Now, so in any general distance x, the force was kq and q2 by x square. Now, finally, we are bringing it to r. Okay, and can you tell me, is this force going to be constant when we're bringing it near and near and near to q1, or will it be variable? Right, because the distance is always changing. So when it was an infinity, the force was zero. And when we start coming closer to the charges, the force would be even higher. And it would be difficult for this charge, to come even closer. It will start experiencing more and more repulsion. So the force is variable, okay? And whenever we have variable forces, we cannot do the normal calculations of arithmetic kind of calculations. For variable, we use limit, or we used calculus. Newton was the master of this subject, and he started this. He was like father of calculus as well as physics, and actually physics gave him the idea of calculus. So yeah, one of the greats, all-time greats. So what he thought was, like, if there are certain things which are changing over time like this, okay, what I'm trying to say here is that, let's say I had a constant force, okay, and you know that force is nothing but work is nothing but force times displacement, right? F and d. So if I have a plot of force against displacement, and let's say call it x, if the force is constant, and then let's say you displace it from 0 to let's say r, the force would be constant, right? And the work done would be given by the area under this curve. And the area under this curve is nothing but your f into d, or r, let's call this d, right? Which is the area of this rectangle. But if the force was itself very varying, how do we calculate the work done? Exactly. So we have this x and we have the force here. Now, even though the force is varying over displacement, in a small section, very small section, the force would be constant, right, in this limit. And let's say we split it across this displacement, and we can say that the force was constant here. And this small displacement we can call as dx, right? And then we keep on. So now here in this small displacement, the work done would be nothing but f into dx, right? And then we do it across the entire. So let's say we moved it till here, 0 to d, okay? Then what we can say is, it would, so the total work done, we can write as, exactly. Uh, so initially, what Newton did was, he used to use a symbol summation, and they used to do the limit of the sum. And then because this summation symbol, right, sigma. So sigma they used, but then this sigma is used only for countable things and not infinity usually. So then this is the concept called as integration as the limit of sum, and then he devised the symbol as integration, which is nothing but the limit of sum. Limit of sum means we are limiting the sum for infinite iterations. So this small strips would be infinite. There would be many of them, right? And then we would do this over x from 0 to d, and that gives me the work, right? So when we want to calculate the work in case of variable forces, it would be integration of f and dx over the displacements that you are doing. Okay. So I started from 0 here, but in general, what will happen is, let's say if I'm starting from any point x1 and I'm going to any point x2, uh, I think I should have made it more clear or written somewhere else better. It's okay if I write it here. Okay. So in any generic scenario, it would be from x1 to x2 force time dx, right? This is your generic expression of the work. It takes care of all the scenarios. Now, if you make the force constant and the displacement also constant, these two constant being will come out of the integration sign, and integration would be nothing but one, right? And that is nothing but same thing. So if force is constant, force will come out, and then integration of dx from x2 to x1 would be 1, and then you applied the limit, then it would be x2 minus x1, right? That is the same thing as f into x2 minus x1, that is the displacement, and that would be this constant case. But if it is variable and force is varying, then this expression would work fine, and force would be the function of displacement, so you cannot take it out. It is not constant here, right? That's why it is inside the integration sign. We'll cover this a bit more, but I think this is the generic idea, and you understand why we have to use integration here, because force is varying, and you see force is a function of x, right? Here force is a function of x, so you cannot take this force out of the integration. All right, so how do we calculate work here then? So the external, we are coming back to this equation. So the charge q2 is coming near charge q1, and we in at any general distance x, the force is given by Coulomb's force, kq and q2 by x square, and we have to finally move it to a distance r from the q1, and we are trying to calculate what would be the work done. Okay, so the external work done in shifting, and this term is very important, I'll tell you why. In shifting q2 by a distance is dw. Let's call this small work. Okay, so dw is a small work. We can call this as minus f dx, and again this minus sign is very important. See, we are saying that f is being applied towards the right? The charge, since they are of same nature, the force would be repulsive, and it would be towards the right. Now, to overcome that, there has to be an external force applied. So you have to hold it by hand. I'm just giving an example. Okay, let's say you have to hold it by hand, and you have to apply almost at least this much force, right? So that it starts moving in the opposite direction, right? You think about this as a magnet. When you have a stronger magnet, and then you're bringing a small magnet, by itself it will go and run to infinity, right? North and south pole, let's say. And you're bringing a small magnet, then at least you have to hold it by hand and push it across, right? Slowly, slowly. At least you have to apply the similar force that this magnet is applying on that, right? So that we're talking, so the work here is now done by you are doing the work on this charge to bring it near. So when the work that you're doing, all of that work that you do on this charge will convert into its potential energy, right? So you're doing the work on this, and you're putting a force. That's why I'm saying external work done. So you are doing the work on this. So the external work done shifting q2 by a distance is dw is equal to minus f dx minus fy, because you are going to apply an equal force equal to Coulombic force at least, so that this charge starts moving in the opposite direction. And you're moving it initially to a very small distance because the force is moving. And this can be given by, what is the force value? As I said, it has to be equal to Coulombic force at least. So it would be equal to minus k q1 q2 by x square dx, right? This is your small work done in displacing this by a small distance dx, right? Okay, now to find the complete work done, we'll take help from Newton and ask him to give his integration formula, and we use integration as the limit of sum. We'll do integration of small work done and over the entire distance. So what is the entire distance? It's from infinity initially to the final position, which is r, and this becomes integration of from infinity to r minus k q1 q2 by x square dx. Now, can you tell me what are all constants here? What are all the things constant inside the integration, right? Even q1 and q2 are constants, right? They never change. Let's say this is 2 coulomb, this is 5 coulomb. It won't change. So these are all constants. So we take k outside, we take q1 outside, we take q2 outside. What we are left inside the integration is nothing but that is the only thing which is varying, and that is the displacement. So we have dx over x square. Only the displacement is varying. Now, I hope you're familiar with integration, the basics of it. Can you help me with this? How do I integrate this? Oh, uh, okay, no worries, no worries. So I'll tell you the basics of it. Okay. So integration is, see, I can teach integration in a very, nice way where we discuss all, the nuances and history of it. But for this, for now, I will limit myself to the formula based approach, which is I hate the most. Okay. So yeah, but yeah, let's pardon me for that, because integration and this mathematics is like very close to my heart. But for here, we since we are short on time, I'll give you the formula. So if we want to integrate x to any general power n with respect to dx, the formula is x to the power n plus 1 upon n plus 1, and there is a constant which always comes called as c, is called as arbitrary constant. Could be 0 also. Okay. This constant could be 0. This is the formula. So if you want to integrate any expression with power n with respect to dx, you have to just raise the power by 1 and divide it by that power plus 1. On the similar note, if you have to differentiation is just the opposite of integration. Any expression to the power n with respect to x, you have to take the power out first, n times x to the power n minus 1. So the power gets reduced in differentiation. Okay. I think this is all what we need here. So you can take this formula for now, and then we'll be able to solve this problem. If you want why we are doing this, I can give you a complete lecture on this later on. Okay. So now what I'll do is to bring this into that format of which we know about the formula. I'll write it. Can I write it this as x to the power minus 2 dx? After all, it was 1 by x square, right? So I just took it to the numerator, the power reduces. Now, do you think it is in the same format as we were thinking here? X to the power n dx. N could be anything, right? It could be positive, could be negative. So now we have x to the power n dx, and now we want to integrate it. So how do we do that? You have to tell me. So we have k q1 q2, and then tell me what would be the answer here. N is nothing but minus 2. So you have to do n plus 1 upon n plus 1. Not dx. So dx is nothing but different. So you see dx was here, but did I take dx here in the final output? No, right? So we have to integrate only x with respect to dx. So when I write x to the power n dx means you have to integrate x with respect to dx, right? Now you see there are two variables you can see here. N is there, x is there, dx is there. Dx by itself means small x. Okay. So okay, so I'll tell you what it will be. So n is nothing but minus 2. The formula says that you have to write x to the power n plus 1. That would be nothing but minus 2 plus 1 over n plus 1. So it would again be minus 2 plus 1. This is my integration. And then we have to apply some limits to it, which you see here. As we were taking the charge from minus infinity to r, from infinity to r, right? So we are taking it from infinity to r, right? This is your final output. I can also write a plus c, but let's see. Well, let's write that, and then we'll say that let's assume that this is 0. Okay. A constant could be 0 also, right? So but we can assume that it is 0 for now, or we can write that as well. Usually what happens is that when you have limits applied over integration, the constant is not there. So that is another concept. So it would actually not be there. Okay. You see here, there was no limits, right? I'm sorry. So since there was no limit, we got a constant, but here there was a limit, infinity to r, and hence we were getting this. We did not get any constant. Okay. Now let's try solving it out. Vidush, till here it's clear, right? X to the power minus 2, we just applied the formula, which is here. And then we have minus k, q1, q2. Now what is minus 2 plus 1? It's nothing but minus 1. So you get x to the power minus 1 over minus 1. Again, then limits are from infinity to r. And then this become, can I take this minus outside? I'm very tempted to do so. Let's do that. Minus 1 comes here. This becomes plus k q1 q2. And then inside this, we have x to the power minus 1, which is nothing but 1 by x, right? From infinity to r. Now, what we do with this limits is that we have to use the first, you have to use the first limit, that is the to limit. I mean, this is your destination, right? And then you have to take your source, and then you have to subtract them. By that I mean, you have k, q, and q2 sitting outside. You use this first, that's destination. So you have 1 by r minus, you have to use destination later on. Then you have to write 1 by infinity. And that's how you apply the limits. Was this confusing? What we do is, whatever expression we get, you put the value of final limit, which is at the top first, then you put a minus sign, and then you put the initial limit after that, and then you take a difference. It's like what I was trying to say here with the work done. I'll again do a bit of, I will digress a little to give you an idea. So when the force was constant, right, and we were starting with initial distance x2, we're going to final distance x2, okay, and the force was applied, and then we had the displacement x. We said that the area under this curve will give us the work done, right? And if we go by a normal expression, so when we do a small split, assuming that we go by the same formula, if this is small split and we have this small distance dx and the force value is f, the work would be given by f times dx. This is your small work. Then if I want to find the complete total work, W total, it would be by using integration as a limit of sum. I'll do integration of dw. That would be integration of f dx. But from where to where? I'm taking from x1 to x2. So it will be from x1 to x2, right? Now, over this entire distance, I see that this f is constant. Let's say this is 10 Newton, and it's never changing. So it would become as 10 dx, right? x1 to x2. Now, there is a concept in integration that a constant thing can be taken outside. So I can take 10 outside, it becomes an integration of only dx over x1 from x1 to x2, okay? Again, there comes an integration formula here. That means that, where was this integration? You can write that formula down here for you so that you can refer these later. I would advise that you learn them also, okay? So integration of 1 with dx is nothing but x plus c, okay? This is another formula. So if you're integrating nothing, just dx you're integrating, it would be just x. So integration of dx or 1 dx, I can write dx as 1 into dx, right? 1 into dx. So that would become 10 into x, right? Because integration of dx is nothing but x. And now you have to do it from x1 to x2. Now what we do with limits is that we apply the final limit first. So we do x2, replace x with x2, minus initial limit would be x1. And that's, so this was a very roundabout way of doing things. We could have easily done the area under this curve, and that would be nothing but this would be your length, which is x2 minus x1, and this is your breadth, which is nothing but 10. So 10 times x2 minus x1, isn't it? And that's what we got here with integration also. So why I did so, I wanted to show you like how we apply limits. It's the final minus initial, whatever integrate. This is called as integrand, what you get as a result of integration. Okay. So yeah, let's come back here. I think we have digressed a lot. So we had k, q, and q2, and then we had got the integration result as 1 by x. I applied the limits. I applied r first, which was the final limit, minus I applied infinity later on, which was the initial limit, right? So far, so good. So we have k, q1, q2. Now, tell me, what is 1 upon infinity? It would be, right, theoretically. So when I say 1 upon 1000, it would be 0.0.0.1. When I say 1 upon 1 million, it would be 0.6, I think 5 zeros and then 1. When I say 1 billion, it would be 0. 9, 0, and 1. But here I'm talking about infinity, which is theoretically 0. Nothing is larger than infinity, and it would be theoretically 0. So we are left only with 1. Okay. So this is our final expression, and we have got our work done by electrostatic potential energy in bringing the charge q2 near q1 at a distance r is equal to k q1 q2 upon r. Notice that it is not 1 upon r square. Okay. So we have calculated the work which was done in bringing this charge q2 from infinity near charge q1 at a final distance r. And the work which we did in doing so was k q1 q2 upon r. And what would be the unit of this? This would be in joules. Exactly. It inversely varies with the distance. So that means the closer you bring the charges together, the larger the work you would have to do, right? Uh, But assuming that both the charges were positive, okay? If the charges were of opposite signs, then it would be negative, right? If this was negative. Now, when you reduce r, then this would increase in negative direction. So that makes sense, right? What it means is that when you have charges of opposite nature, you don't have to do any work. I mean, they would by themselves try to come together, right? You don't have to apply the external force. Rather, you would have to apply the force to stop them to get stuck, right? And hence the work done would be negative in that case. And if it is but charges are alike, you would have to do a positive work, put a force on it to to get closer. And the closer you try to bring them, the larger the work you have to do, right? So, and that's why the inverse nature. And also you can see that it is also directly proportional to the product of the charges. So if the charges are of very high magnitude, the larger the work you would have to do, push harder. Okay. So when we do this much work, this work will get converted into the potential energy, right, of the system, because work is never we are in the conservative force field, and mechanical energy is conserved. So what the work that you did on that system of charges to bring them together becomes the potential energy of the system, right? And this potential energy is nothing but your interaction. It is called as interaction energy or electrostatic potential energy. Okay. So as I told you, in the gravitational system, the work that we did in bringing that up becomes the potential energy of that system. In the case of spring mass system, the work I did in pushing the spring internally or I stretching the spring, that became the potential energy of that system. Similarly, in an electrostatic force, the work that I did in bringing these two charges together near each other turns into the potential energy of that system. So now this system of charges has the potential to do something as compared to initially, which was our reference uh, scenario where they were at infinity and they were happy. They were not bothered about anything. They're just lying there. But when you bring them together by doing some work and then you leave them there, they are not happy. They want to do something. In this particular scenario, they want to just run away from each other. So as soon as you stop applying the force, they will run to infinity again. Or if they were of opposite natures, you would have to apply the force, to stop them from sticking together. And then as soon as you stop them, they will, stick together. So hope you got the idea. Is there any question? Okay.